The world is changing around us. It is becoming more and more difficult to remain anonymous. And this also applies to our practice of reproductive medicine, where confidentiality and anonymity sometimes are very, very important. We are increasingly using in reproductive medicine donor gametes, even donated embryos. And most of those donations are so-called confidential donations. In other words, the donor does not know who the recipient is, and the recipients don't know who the donors are. And this confidentiality is obviously very important for both sides, and we are very committed to this confidentiality here at CHR, and not only for legal reasons. We're committed to it because I think it facilitates the donation process. But donations create another issue, and that is the issue I want to talk to you about today briefly. For the longest time, relatively little attention has been paid to the fact that more and more children are born as the result of either sperm donation, egg donation, or embryo donation. And while we have been talking to patients about how to deal later in life with telling their children whether they want it or not, how they were conceived, we really did not, at least from our current viewpoint, pay enough attention to this question. And that is why we want to address it here today a little bit more in detail. We still very strongly believe that in the end it is not for us to decide whether parents tell their children if they are conceived by egg, sperm, or embryo donation. That is and will always be, in our opinion, a decision to be made by the parents. We have been practicing the use of donor gametes and donor embryos now for a good number of decades. And in those decades, we have observed various behavior patterns. In the beginning, when donations started, most couples never even thought about telling their offspring. And then over time, telling their children became increasingly popular. Indeed, sometimes parents even demanded the possibility to be able to tell the children. But over the decades, we learned something else that is very important, and that is that parents sometimes change their mind. We have seen parents who were convinced they would tell their children, and then we have seen parents who were convinced they would not tell their children and ended up telling their children. In a way, whether to tell or not to tell is therefore unpredictable, because, as we heard from quite a number of parents over the decades, it also depends on who the child is that is growing up in your house. There are some children who basically cry out for knowing, and there are other children where you think, if they would know, maybe it wouldn't be in their best interest. And only you as a parent will be able to judge that. But unquestionably, this issue is rising to the forefront because the world around us is changing. It is now routine to test ourselves genetically. And if your children send off their saliva or their blood for a 23andMe test or one of the other commercially easily accessible genetic tests now, they may on their own discover that their mother or their father is not really their genetic mother or father. And this circumstance didn't exist 20 years ago or 30 years ago when we started using donor situation in reproductive medicine. In those days, it was extremely unlikely that the child that grew up, excluding obviously medical emergencies where genetic information became essential, which happens exceedingly rarely, it was incredibly unlikely that somebody would say, oh, I want to test if my parents are really my parents. But now that could happen, just as a side effect of trying to find out whether there are more relatives living around. And I think this needs to be considered by parents. The world is changing. And with it, parents also need to rethink what they want to tell their children, when they want to tell their children, and whether they at all want to tell their children if they were conceived with either donor eggs, donor sperm, or donor embryos. Again, we are not here to tell you that you should do that. We are not here to tell you how to live your life and raise your family. But we are here to tell you what is happening and to give you the information that allows you, the patient, to make the right decision for your family. Goodbye.